It was nearly 11:30 when Sheriff Parnell Tupper finally arrived at the scene of the crash on Highway 47. He had been snug in bed, and pleased to stay there for the rest of his life, thank you, when Mavis called from HQ in Junction City to rouse him, demolishing a very nice dream in progress and setting the stage for a lousy night. It was something about a fender bender out near Wormwood, that boarded up pile of shit that still dared to call itself a town. While his wife snored her usual symphony in B-flat, Tupper had rolled out of bed, propped his considerable bulk on his skinny legs, and staggered to the bathroom to unload a day's worth of piss. Ever since the wife, Adelia, had decided to go to business school, he had been forced to stay home during the days to babysit Chucky, the 5-year-old rugrat that Adelia swore he was the father of, but looked suspiciously like the next-door neighbor, red hair and all. Tupper hated night shift work worse than he hated rattlesnakes, but Adelia knew how to lay down the law. Besides, when she graduated from school, she might land a job, and he could cut to part-time. Up and about, he had thought about taking a shower, then said to hell with it. He thought about changing into a fresh uniform, then said to hell with it. He went downstairs and thought about taking Chucky someplace for a DNA test, but it was too late to find any open labs. So to hell with that too. In the end, he drove through Junction City and caught Highway 47 south. It took some 20 minutes just to get where Deputy Bob Martell's cruiser was sitting dead on the road with all its Christmas lights still flashing. There was a pall of smoke in the air that smelled bad. Tupper eyed the wreck as he pulled up and stopped. Jesus frickin' Christ, he grunted, fetching his official Diamond County flashlight off the footboard, and got out. Deputy Martell had put orange flares all over the road and was standing just past the wreck, waving directions at an approaching car. He looked back and nodded, then jerked his thumb over his shoulder. "Look what I found, boss." Tupper looked, and a thought popped instantly into his head. The memory of seeing the space shuttle explosion live on TV. These two cars had exploded and then melted together. Red-hot sheet metal glowed at the base of it. The tires were still burning. Pools of streaming glass were hardening on the asphalt, which itself had burned up some. Tupper ducked, squinting. One of the fried license plates indicated New Jersey, a hell of a long way to drive just to die in a crash in New Mexico. He skirted the wreckage. This plate might say New York, or it might not, since it had curled up like a pretzel. He went to the nearest car and shined his light inside. He had seen incinerated bodies before, but it was never pleasant. Considering the amount of heat still pressing out from the debris, the temperature must have been upward of 2,000 degrees at its peak. But whoever was inside wouldn't have minded one bit. These bodies would be found in chunks and pieces that had nothing to do with the fire. Martell wandered over. "Suppose we ought to call an ambulance?" Tupper looked at him. Below his mirrored sunglasses, Martell was grinning like a baboon. He loved this kind of stuff, being the eager beaver and all that. It was probably the closest thing to a war he had ever seen. Tupper had heard all his tales about the artillery. There could never be enough bombs in the world for Bob Martell. "Call for a wrecker," Tupper told him. "Tell him there's no hurry, though. This mess is going to be hot for another hour or two." "Have you done your diagram?" "Diagram?" Martell quit grinning. "I have to diagram this?" "How about the accident report? You done that yet?" He shifted uneasily. "I've been directing traffic. I'll do them later." "Any witnesses to all this?" Martell shrugged. "Just me, I guess." "You guess?" He squared his shoulders. "It was just me. I was chasing them down." "So you were involved. You'll need a Form 286. "No problem." Tupper nodded. "Any luck finding body parts? Anything ejected?" "We don't want the coyotes dragging away some guy's head." "Well, now," Martell said, frowning. "There was some kind of ejection. The guy in the convertible. He jumped out just before the impact. I think he rolled down into the ditch there. Tupper looked. So where's he at now? Burned up, I guess. At least there ain't nothing down there anymore. What do you mean, nothing? Bodies just don't burn up. The skeletons can't vanish. Go look some more. Martel heaved out a sigh. Fine. Got nothing else to do. I don't get off at midnight or nothing. And he stomped away. Keep an eye out for parts of other people, Tupper called after him. We want to keep this tidy. Ain't going to be no others, Martel said over his shoulder. The guy in the Cadillac already headed east. Tupper almost choked. Come again? Deputy Martel turned. He scratched his hat, looking befuddled. That's funny. I almost forgot about all that. He ambled back, frowning, looking suddenly groggy. This guy comes out of the wreck, and he asked me which way the other guy went. So I says east, and he says thank you, and he walks away. Now Tupper frowned. Martel was no bomb-dropping wannabe hero. This wreck had put him straight into shock. He took him by the arm. Come on, Bob. We better sit down a minute. Martel let himself be led. What for? I got a bottle of water in my car. Straighten you right out. You say a man walked away from the crash? Uh-huh. He was all smoky and his hair was still on fire, but he was real nice. That's why I can't figure out why the other fellow was shooting at him. Martel took a long breath as he walked. Iron Man Martel had watched one too many war movies. Now you looky here. You did a good job on the flares and we can leave them for a while. What you need now is a lot of rest. Maybe a nice cool shower. My shift's about over anyway, Martel said. I do feel kind of funny all of a sudden. I'll just drive straight home. No driving for you, Tupper said. He passed the old Galaxy that was still lit up red, blue, and white. Enough warning for any traffic tonight that this was official police business, and fed Martel into the passenger seat of his own cruiser. He got him behind the wheel and deliberated for a moment. Take Bob all the way back to Junction City? That would be almost a whole hour down the drain. Wormwood was only a mile or two away. But geez, Wormwood? The only place to bed down Bob's screwball self was the old Mission Inn, which was barely one step up from a camping trailer in a junkyard. But he could rest there, take a bath, sleep off the stress of his first real crash. Why the hell not? He muttered, and drove away, hoping Bob Martel wouldn't flip out totally and start thinking he was a chicken or Napoleon or something. At the outskirts of Wormwood, home of the worms and not much else, to Tupper's way of thinking, while rattling along the gravel road, dodging check holes and collapsed barbed wire fences, the sheriff spotted something else out of the ordinary. Under the glare of his headlights, walking determinedly at the left of the road, and looked quite the cowboy, was a tall man wearing a long yellow duster coat and a classic Stinson. The heels of his snakeskin boots gleamed like oiled glass as he walked. In one hand, he held a small case of some sort, perhaps his toilet items if he needed to stop and freshen up before continuing to hike the remaining 500 miles across the desert towards Mexico. Bob Martel, who had been drowsing, perked up. Nah, that ain't him, he said after a beat. Maybe it's the other one. Tupper had no idea which was supposed to be which, but flashed the overhead light bar on and off a couple times anyway. The man stopped and turned. Tupper idled up and rolled his window down a few more inches. How do? He said by the way of greeting when the dust was settled. Have you seen him? The man asked immediately. He had a long, somewhat triangular face, dark hair, generic eyes, no apparent criminal intent. Just another tall guy wearing $800 worth of cowboy clothes, hiking through the night on the outskirts of Wormwood. Happens all the time. Seen who? Tupper ventured. Bob Martel perked up again. It is you, he said, leaning across the seat and sticking his face an inch away from Tupper's ear. You! Except... where'd you get the clothes? Sheriff Tupper and the stranger made eye contact again. Silent agreement ensued. The deputy was bonkers. Tupper pushed Martel back with a shove of his elbow. "Let me do this," he snapped. Back to the stranger. "Did you witness a car crash about half an hour ago? Out on the highway?" He nodded. "I did." "Did you see anyone jump out at the last minute?" He nodded again. "That would be the man I'm looking for." "You saw this man jump out? You were close enough to see?" The stranger put a hand on top of the car and began to drum his fingers. "Of course I was. I was in the Cadillac." Tupper looked at Martel, who was gnawing on a fingernail now, and back to the cowboy. "You came out of that explosion alive?" "That would be impossible. I was able to get out before the gas tanks exploded." "But your car was totaled. Worse than totaled." "I explained this to your partner already. Rather than ask me why I'm not as dead as you'd like, ask me why I have to find Breaker, and find him tonight." Tupper blinked. "Baker?" "Breaker. Brayker. "Yeah, okay, I got it." Tupper ran a hand over his face, feeling worse than he had when Mavis rang his telephone to fire the starter gun for this stupid night. "Well, hop on in. We can clear this up in town." The stranger opened the back door and climbed in. Bob Martel turned and eyed him up and down, mumbling to himself, until Tupper poked a finger hard against his thigh and mouthed a couple shut-ups. The stranger leaned forward to speak to the back of Tupper's head as the sheriff gave gas for the last leg to Wormwood. "He's a very dangerous man, Breaker is. He's a murderer, and a thief." Tupper ducked a little as he drove. The man's breath wafting around his head smelled a lot like burnt rubber. $800 worth of clothes, Tupper thought, and he can't afford a breath mint? "Please don't be telling me you're a cop," Tupper groaned. "Please don't tell me you're some kind of New York detective chasing the mafia into Diamond County." "Actually, I'm just a salesman." "Salesman, eh? Okay, Mr. Salesman. What drove you all the way from the East Coast into New Mexico?" "And if he says my Cadillac drove me, I will be forced to arrest him," Tupper thought darkly. "Mr. Breaker stole something of great value. A valuable antique that is worth an enormous amount to me. And if he is anywhere near one of your quaint little towns, bad things will begin to happen. Dangerous things," the stranger said. Tupper let his eyes drift shut for a moment. Thieves, murderers, salesmen, what's the difference? A voice squawked on the police channel. Tupper got the mic and thumbed the button. "Go ahead, Mavis." The radio was no top-of-the-line Motorola or RCA job, but he was used to its garbled crackling. "That's a 10-4, he said, and looked in the rearview mirror. Reflected from the back seat, the salesman's eyes were bright circles, his eyebrows arched with interest. "That was HQ, Tupper said. "Somebody's just tried to steal a car out of the Eureka Cafe parking lot." The salesman frowned. "Where might that be?" "Well," Tupper said, "it might be in Wormwood, and that might be a hole-in-the-wall town just up ahead, and it might be that your thief is already doing his dirtiest. Works fast, don't he?" The salesman smiled, a thin, satisfied smile. "Very fast, Sheriff. May I say the same for your driving now?" "You may," Tupper replied primly, and poured on the gas. Uncle Willie had done some passing out in his life, and had later awakened to some hangovers that would drop an elephant like a bullet between the eyes. But this one, as he awakened from a nap of no more than 20 or 30 seconds, was right up there amongst the top 10. The top 5, even. Aquanet hangovers were a special piece of hell always reserved for the topmost slots. He was staggering to his feet while assorted horses and mules kicked him in the head, or so it seemed. Crazy lights danced inside his eyeballs, and his ears were full of steam engines, chugging away, and atomic bombs going off at random. When he realized he was erect, he slumped against the nearest object, the gas station, and began giving serious thought to religion, perhaps even Mormonism or Christian Science. A few yards away, another shape was coming to its feet. The smell of spilled gasoline was in the wind. A flicker of distant lighting exposed the scene for a millisecond. Willie cracked an eye open in time and saw a dead gas station bedecked with errant newspaper comics, tumbleweeds, and a flapping sandwich board sign that proclaimed gas to be $1.64 a gallon. Propped against the wall, he opened his mouth and spit out a blot of something salty. He remembered being scared, remembered being hit by a car or falling tree. He lifted a hand and clutched his forehead against the forces that wanted to split it wide open. A car? A tree? His upper lip was torn and bleeding on the inside, and a hot spot on the side of his head spoke of goose eggs and concussions, brain hemorrhages, and approaching death. Worse, his can of hairspray had rolled all the way into the street and left a long line of heaven behind it. Oh, shit. Shit. Oh, my head. My head. Willie grunted. The other shape in the dark was on its feet now. Its shoes scraped against the asphalt as it wobbled upright and dragged itself inexorably towards Uncle Willie once more. One outstretched hand had a tiny spot on the palm that shone and winked in a hideous, greenish light of its own. "Devil!" Willie screamed at it. The wind tore at his ragged clothes and stood his white hair on end. "You devil!" The figure tottered to the right and slumped against the building a few steps away. It staggered an inch or two and said, "I didn't see you in the dark, old fella. Sorry." Uncle Willie hesitated, mentally pocketing a whole string of imprecations that might have captured him the hobo equivalent of an Emmy. He breathed easier, then clutched wildly at a pocket buried inside his wadded clothes. There was a pint of whiskey in there, and it wasn't broken. He fumbled it out with shaking fingers and partook of a long series of gargle-sounding swigs. "I could sue you," he wheezed as he replaced the cap and ran his tongue over his lacerated lip, which now burned like Drano in the old eyeball. Beloved booze began immediately to wash through his system, erasing the remains of panic. "However, I like courts and lawyers about as much as I like spiders in my shoes when I put them on. Care to drink with me?" The dark and frightened figure stepped close, and even in the bad light, became an ordinary man. He had a bloody nose that he swiped at with a sleeve as he took Willie's bottle and regarded it. "Whiskey," he said. Lightning hit the sky again, and in its brief glow, Uncle Willie saw deep holes for eyes, the urgent need of some shaving cream and a razor, and dark and dirty lines of soot smeared like war paint among the lines of his face, which was not a very old face at all. The man put the spout of the bottle to his mouth and tipped his head back. 1, 2, 3 swallows, and he was done. Willie thanked the gods of mercy as it was handed back. Since the hairspray was gone, this little bottle was the only thing that stood between him and death by sobriety. What a kind stranger, to have drunk so little. "So, what brings a young man like yourself here to Wormwood, and at such great speed?" Uncle Willie asked, now that a bond of friendship was established. The man touched his nose again. "Wormwood, eh? Quaint. Real quaint. Give me that bottle." Willie started to protest, but the unwritten law amongst professional scavengers dictated that a man may drink twice of your bottle when offered it once, but no more. Willie handed the bottle over without much enthusiasm, and watched while a good inch of it went down the other man's gullet. "I need a place to bed down," the man said after lowering the bottle to the height of his belt. "You know any place I could do that?" "Bed down?" Willie's eyes were locked onto the bottle. Barely 3, maybe 4 inches left. Did this man know what he was doing? Was he the king of the road enough to know the rules? "There's but one public house left in Wormwood. It's called the Mission Inn. I can direct you to it from here." Oh? Yeah. Willie had begun pointing around. A hint of thunder crawled across the tossing sky, as if unsure which way it should go. More lighting erected tiny ladders far out into the prairie beyond the town. You see that sign? It used to be a grocery store. 1 block past it is the building that used to be a motel before they rerouted the highway and put us off the beaten track. There you would take a left and look for Mission Street in about 6, maybe 7 blocks. The street signs have mostly fallen, but you can tell Mission Street because... His voice trailed off. The dark stranger, with the weird shiny dot on his palm, had hoisted the bottle to his lips in a sudden move and was drinking again. Hey, see here. I offered you a drink in the name of friendship. Yet here you are swilling my liquor like it's root beer. Willie snapped. The man lowered the bottle and eyed him. Take me there, he said. Willie straightened. What? Take me there. He gripped the bottle by the neck and waved it in front of Willie's face, sloshing its delicate innards. Take me to your godforsaken hotel. Let me close my eyes and sleep until I die. Willie took a step backward. Sir, you only have to walk 9 or 10 blocks from where we stand and you'll be there. Be where? He shouted, advancing a step. Where I might be safe? Where I can rest? Where I don't have to deal with this every moment of my life? His free hand swung up and stopped a few inches in front of Willie's face. The 1 dot of green light pulsated, then shifted slightly, and then went out. And I... the man said wearily as he dropped his hand and looked at it. And I must once again fight unto the death. Willie stood mute. There was a lunatic facing him here, a young man carrying a hoist of demons in his soul. Many hobos finally went senile or insane after years of bad booze and lousy nutrition, but for this poor fellow, the time had come far too quickly. Overdoses of hairspray could well be the culprit. Okay, Willie said, straightening his shoulders. I'll take you to the mission. They know me there, and you'll get a bed. With a sudden move of his arm, the man gave up possession of the bottle of whiskey by thumping it against Willie's chest. I only ask for 1 night's sleep, he muttered, hanging his head. Just 1 night's sleep, before we all die. Willie took the bottle. He put 1 gnarled hand on the stranger's shoulder, but immediately felt sheepish and let it fall. Oh, just follow me. You got a name I can use? It's Breaker. Breaker with a Y. And for God's sakes, it isn't Baker. I swear it isn't Baker, and don't ever call me Baker. Never have and never will, Uncle Willie said, and aimed himself towards the abandoned grocery store that would lead to the abandoned motel, which would lead to Mission Street, where the sign that proclaimed its name had long ago fallen down and would never rise again. They walked. For lack of anything to say, Willie told him tales of his olden days as an investor in silver mines, up to the point where the truth got blurry and the booze took over. But this guy Breaker, and don't ever call him Baker, didn't seem to be listening. So when the rain began to drizzle down, Willie decided to shut up and went to work on his last few inches of whiskey.